So now we're going to cover some basic input fields that you would add to a block. These are going to be the fields of which you can manually enter data for the most part. And we'll move on to some of the more advanced fields then in the second video. So what I'll do is I will create a new block called basic fields example. Just for neatness, we're going to say the full width. I always like to use the full width. And as per the previous video, we'll add the row and we will add an element. Let's make it a small bit smaller. So when you add a field, so you hover over and you click add field, you see your list of fields, but it actually presumes that you're going to be adding a text field first. That's because it's the most common field. But when I X out of that, we can see all the fields. And the ones we're going to be covering, like some of these get very, very advanced. Some of them allow you to build charts, to use APIs, but other ones are very basic input fields. And we'll be covering those in this video. So our first one is the one that did pop up, which is the text field. The text field is the most obvious one. It's just a way of entering data manually using a scanner or using your own freehand. So I'll just say text field is the field name. And the two options are whether you want it to be forcing uppercase or using mixed case, which is the mixed case is usually the standard. And the optional default value is the value that will appear in the field after you have created it. So when you load a block, that value will appear. So I'll show you all three of them now. Let's first do the uppercase. Actually, I'll give that a name, text field uppercase. The next one we're going to do is text field mixed case, which is your most standard common one. And finally, we'll do text field with default value. I'll just say my value. And you can even see the value there. So I'm going to the front end. And as you can see, hello, when I type without using cap lock or anything, this will always give me uppercase. Mixed case is your standard one, just like you were typing if you were typing into anything. And this one starts with the value that we wanted. It's worth noting that if we submit this, everything resets, but this actually does reload the value that we wanted. So that's your standard text field. The next thing we will do is, let's just check it out. We'll add a new row, and we'll add a new grid element. So now we have to close the text field, and we're going to do large text field. This is almost identical to the standard text field. And you'll also see we have other fields which kind of cover this in a better way now, which we'll move on to later, but I'll show you this field anyway. Large text field, uppercase. I have to select it. And large text field. Mixed case. And as you can see, it's almost identical to the normal input field. The only difference is it doesn't have a default value and it's a larger field. It's worth noting that in this particular field, you can't do your own line break, and I will show you in more advanced fields how you can do that in a different type of field. So this is really just for for having a bit more space in the field entry. Now we move on. And the next one is the checkbox. So checkbox example. And we'll do the checked value. So when it's checked, so this is basically the value when you click the box. So what we'll do is we'll do it first and then I'll show you. So checked value is 1, unchecked 0. And we'll show you these ones now in a minute. So when I go to the front end here, I'm just going to adjust what we can see down here. I'll pause the video to do that because that's going to be covered in a different course. So I've now adjusted it. This field, this checkbox example didn't exist yet for this particular record. So for neatness, I'll delete this record. Click here and click delete, press OK. So now we've clean. So checkbox example, if I just leave it and don't press anything and I press submit, we're going to have 0. And the reason we have 0 is I set that as the unchecked value. And now for this one, checkbox example, we have 1. That's the checked and unchecked values. So when I go back to edit mode, and I edit this field, as you can see, checkbox example 1 and 0. Now let's do another one that's slightly more advanced. Checkbox example 2. Let's just say the checked value is yes, the unchecked value is no. But sometimes people may not want the field name to be the thing that sits beside the actual checkbox. Sometimes we want our own text, like I agree to the terms and conditions. So as you can see here, this one is different text, but the field name is actually checkbox example 2. And we've changed the yes and no, or the checked and unchecked values. So for instance, if I do this and this, we can see checkbox example 2 is yes, and checkbox example is 1. But that was the text that appeared beside it. And now we're going to show you our first piece of kind of more advanced functionality, which is how our fields communicate with each other. So our third checkbox example is going to get a value from another field. So let's say text field uppercase. So we create our checkbox, value from text field uppercase. It's worth noting this time, oh yeah, so get the value from the text field uppercase field. That's just so we can read this properly, or so we can understand what's going on in the block. This option here, replace check value with value from another local field. It allows us to get the value from a different field, and when that value changes, this checkbox gets updated. So I'm going to pick text field uppercase and I press submit. And now if I say hello and I check this, it gets hello. Why is this useful? Sometimes you might have maybe different users logging into the same block, and this might be a username or something, and you might have a list here of checkboxes, and it allows different people to have different values, and that value gets applied when they check it. But for now, I guess we'll be moving on to use cases in the future. For now, the important part to remember is that that option is designed to get the value from another field instead of using the checked unchecked. So when I press submit, we get hello, which is the same value as this one. It doesn't have a unchecked value. So the idea of this is just to get the value from a different one, and that's all. Otherwise, it's NA, not applicable. The next field we are going to look at is the button field. This is quite similar to the checkbox field. It has a pressed and unpressed value. The options for it are a little more limited. Button field example. Let's say pressed values is yes, unpressed is no. We can give it a color. We say blue, press submit. And what we'll do is just submit two values, one unpressed. We can see button field example, no, because I didn't press it. And when I do press it, button field example, yes. It's as simple as that. There isn't a whole lot more you can do with that field. Often people use it to trigger rules and do other things, but that's going to be in future modules where we can start utilizing a few of these fields to do other things. So the next input field we're going to look at is the multi-button field. So this is a list of buttons of which someone can choose from. So we can start adding our button names. Yes, no, maybe. And you can also choose a default value. So let's just say the default value is yes. So as you can see, this gives a list of buttons, and in this case I had a default value of yes. We don't have to use a default value. So now without even pressing anything, it has the value yes, but we can change that to whatever we like. That's the multi-button field. Next field we'll look at is the drop down from list. This is quite similar to the multi-button field. We create a list and it generates a select drop down. So let's just to avoid confusion, we'll do the same list. And this time we'll say no is the default value. And as you can see, it generates a drop down, which allows the user to select and it also uses the default value. We'll continue on with our basic input fields. So the next one is the date time selector. There's three different fundamental options in this, and what we will do is do all three as different fields. So date time example, and if I click date time as the option that we're going to pick for our display, we'll see the date time pop up. So when I click here, we see the ability to select the date and the time. To be honest, this is a kind of our legacy one. We don't really use it as the other ones. So we go date time selector. We'll say just date example. So now we've picked just the date. We'll worry about these in a few minutes. We'll move on to it, but I'm just going to do a basic date on its own first. So there we are, we see the date. I don't think there's need for me to go to the front end to show how that'll come out. It shows the same way basically. And the next one is just the time. And there's the time. So we'll just quickly go to the front end again now that we've them set up. So here's the date, and it gives you down to the second. Sorry, that's the date time. Here's the date, and we can pick from whatever date. And here's the time. You can manually type it, or you can use the buttons. The default to the current time, you might notice that. So here's the output. One gives you the full date time. The next one gives you just the date, and the next one just gives you the time. That completes our initial input fields, our most basic ones. In the next video, we're going to explore the date time field a little more, and we're going to look at a few more input fields that are slightly more advanced than what I just showed you there. Thank you. Goodbye.